as we say in Scrum, will inspect, measure, and then decide the level of eloquence as well as the talent that you speak of. Anyway, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for showing up so early on Saturday morning with the kind of weather that we have. So I appreciate it. What I want to do, actually, before I start, as Fred briefly mentioned, I did work in mostly technology companies, Sun Microsystems, followed by Cisco, and did some independent work before going to Infinera. My domain is network management, and then last several years I've been focusing on, generally speaking, data center, cloud, specifically the application layer, orchestration layer of cloud stack. And I've been in agile / Scrum / DevOps type of environment for the last several years. I feel pretty passionately about some of these new technologies, not just for the sake of technologies, but business models that they propose for engaging with the customer and solving customers' business problems. As a service or cloud consumption, as it is called commonly, these are, I believe, the models that are going to stay around moving forward, because that gives the customer flexibility as opposed to the past where customer had to invest heavily in some technology solution and then it was a customer to make it successful within their environment. So these are some of the kind of work that I've done, and I feel passionately about it, as I mentioned. Some of it is going to get reflected in the presentation, DevOps being one of the key components, and CI/CD is what I'm going to talk about. Okay, that said, let's jump in. So the key idea for today's next 48 minutes or so, 45 minutes, is this is what I'm proposing, and I appreciate if you guys can share your own experiences as well as your thoughts. I'd like to exchange some notes so that collectively we learn something during this time that we have together. So my key main point, the takeaway, if you will, from this discussion, hopefully, is that Scrum framework is actually essential to the continuous integration, continuous delivery type of operation. And in fact, the two support each other. They are symbiotic in relationship. I almost kind of look at it as yin and yang. That's why I have that picture on the left of the screen. The outline, I sort of thought about it and I said, maybe this is our 1 hour sprint. Focus on concepts and principles, pragmatic application of those principles. I'm not going to venture into the tools or the supporting technologies. That would be a separate presentation, and down the road maybe I'll have opportunity to do that, but tooling, etc., or some vendor specific talk is not what I intend our discussion to be. And as I mentioned, collectively my goal is that all of us learn from each other and walk away from this discussion a little bit wiser and a bit more informed. Okay, in a nutshell, we have Scrum. I'm using the logos, hopefully people are familiar with it. Scrum being the framework for agile approach. These are my words. Please feel free to steer me in the right direction. If there is a better terminology that you feel strongly about, you're most welcome to share that, and I'll adopt it as much as I can. Scrum would provide foundational principles of how you would approach an agile development. Fair statement?
Mm-hmm.
But we talk about it time and again that Scrum requires a mind shift or culture change. I'm using the phrase culture change in this context, but it is in my mind same thing as a mind shift or looking at things in a different way and approaching it differently. If you are familiar with the CI/CD or the continuous integration, continuous development framework, this loop is a very common, famous logo or pictorial that people use to describe that. Okay. Right now I'm using it as a picture, but if you read through that in the slide presentation that I will share with Fred, so you always will have access to it, you will see the different motions that you go through in this continuous process that takes place pretty much on a daily basis, and I'll talk about it a little more. Here, the core principle is that your software-defined life cycle of the products that you have developed. There is going to be tremendous amount of automation when an organization or a team is mature in this mode of operation. So a lot of automation of the process tasks. And again, this requires culture change. I'll talk about some of that. But just to take a quick example, at first, a development engineer coming from traditional process environment might find it difficult to write or create a new piece of code in the first part of the day, and then by lunchtime she or he is checking that code into actually the main branch of the code. Okay? That might be unusual for somebody coming from the old style process. So that's where that culture change comes in. And finally, development and operations, as in the process of creating new feature functionality in your product, being in one part of your team, and then once that product is deployed into production, the operation of that system or the product being in some other part of the system, that was the old style organization structure. In this, the two are meshed very tightly, and again at maturity level, there is no distinction between the development and operation. So that's the key concept there. Here, we're talking about that organizational structure. I'm going to expand on that in slides that are upcoming. And we talk about roles and responsibility, in fact, how that role and responsibility are fused together or merged together. Once again, that is a culture change. If you have not operated as a team in this mode, it does require fair bit of internalization and fair bit of mind shift. So, talking about what Scrum means to CI/CD and DevOps, that's the common denominator that I personally is the change of culture, change of mind, different approach to solving the problem that you have to solve in business and technology world. Questions so far? Any thoughts? No? Alright, now I'm getting to know some of you. Would love to develop better understanding of the talent and the skill set that you have, your past experience. But not knowing which of you are familiar and which of you may not be familiar with some of these concepts. In that spirit, I sort of quickly put together a basic high-level description of what I mean or how I see, say, continuous integration. It's a process whereby the developers validate the newly written code that I mentioned frequently. We'll talk about what frequently means. The developer is checking their code. Notice I've underlined mainline branch at least once a day. This is a common industry practice. If you want to call yourself a continuous integration shop, this is required. Now, some of you, or maybe all of you, are aware that there are many companies such as Google or Amazon, the likes of them. They not only check in their code, they release their code multiple times in a day. Whether you realize it or not, that's happening. So that's the frequency and the rapidity with which things are moving. Every check-in triggers a build, so that's the nuance now. Just checking in is not enough. You want to check in the code, and then that usually, when you have attained some level of maturity, it's an automatic trigger to create the build, and all unit tests are carried out. Build failure would raise an alert, and they would inform the developers who did do the check-in, because of which the build may have failed. There are systems sophisticated enough to be able to pinpoint logs. And the code is rolled back automatically. Build didn't go through, something's wrong, it needs to be fixed. Let's restore the state of affairs to the previously stable state of the system. Okay, here's the key point. Integration efforts are not monumental in this context because you are grappling with code that was created, new code that was created in the last few hours usually. We are not talking about that scenario that came up several times in Fred's case studies that I've participated in. That says, oh, the development team did their work for 2 or 3 months and then they handed it to integration team and so on and so forth. That scenario does not transpire in this mode. Okay, let's have a quiz. Where is the integration engineering team?
It's in the dev team.
It's in the dev team. Is the accurate answer? So, most of us, pretty much all of us know, a Scrum team is composed of which roles?
Product owner.
Product owner, okay. Scrum Master
Dev team.
and dev team.
Development.
There is development. Within the development team, you got everything. You have QA, integration. In fact, the same developer could be doing multiple tasks. Fair enough? Everybody together on this one? So yes, there is no integration team. And that means that some of those challenges you experience would not be arising. There would be some other challenges, of course, but not this problem of, oh, integration team is taking a long time, there is a blame game going on, and so forth. You are the developer, you wrote a code, it made the build not to go through, you're going to fix this. Transparency and accountability. Fair enough? That's where that interlock between at least CI and the Scrum. Alright, in the same spirit. What is continuous deployment? Usually automatically, or rather I would say preferably automatically, if not at least manually, you're going to deploy the build that you just created today. And where are you going to deploy it? You could, in theory, deploy it in stage or test environment or production environment. The recommendation is that you deploy it in production or production-like environment. And people like Facebook, they unabashedly deploy it in production. That's their mindset. They're not holding back. What that means, you're deploying almost every day, pretty much. You're going to decouple releases from the sprints. The sprints can be a couple of weeks or 4-week time frame. That's up to the Scrum team. But that does not mean that you're not going to deploy or even release code until the sprint is over. The user story sign off could happen mid-sprint, and then regardless of anything else, the deployment is continued. All new code, or rather allow new code to be in feature branch for only short time. I'm going to elaborate on this a little bit. This is a very fundamental point. Remember I said a little bit ago that there is no scenario where the developer hangs on to their new code for a period of time and then the integration happens and so forth. That creates that time lag between the creation of the code and the time when the new code or feature is exposed in production or production-like environment and exposed to the end user or the product owner. That is not generally permitted or not recommended, I would say. If you allow developers to create from their code branch, everybody familiar with configuration management system, generally speaking. So there is a mainline branch that holds all your code that associated with a product release. And then you can pull branches for either bug fixing or new feature development and so forth. If you allow these branches to exist for a long period of time, as a developer, I could commit my code only to the branch and tell my product owner, oh, it's working. I can show it to you on this branch. When I create the build from this branch, everything's fine. In fact, the other version of it is, I have my environment in my laptop. I can show you how wonderfully it works. Can you please sign off now? Can we consider it done? No. Absolutely not. That is why we say do not allow feature branches to exist for a long period. Yes, they have their purpose for short period of time. Use them, then they disappear, and ultimately it's your mainline code branch that holds the source of code. Good, bad, or ugly, but that's where the truth is. Automate test-driven deployment. This is a catchphrase that is floating around quite a bit these days. Test-driven deployment, meaning you deploy and right on either side of the deployment you would carry out tests, unit tests, code reviews, etc. before the deployment. After the deployment, some production tests as well as regression testing to certify that build fine. So again, what's the key takeaway from all of this? A working system is continuously available in the hope that we avoid continuous frustration.
that the CF?
Yeah, CICD minus CF. I like that. That's what I'm talking about. Alright, questions here? If any of this is new to you, feel free to ask question. If you have experience with it, I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. Yes,
Just an overall comment, the old model we might have been thinking of is, multiple iterations, each one producing something that could be released, but the decision to release was up to the product owner saying, hey, now's a good time, there's a trade show coming up, etc. I'm going to batch these three iterations together, call that a release, etc. Here's the time. It's getting that mapping of multiple iterations to one release, kind of reversing it and saying, wait a minute, we're not only going back to one-to-one, we're even pushing it the other way. The release is happening more often than the iterations, at a cadence that's faster than the iterations rather than at a cadence that was slower than the iterations.
Okay.
Different kind of model.
It is a different kind of model, I agree. I would say...
May I comment about that?
Okay.
Because that's near and dear to my heart.
Please.
There's a common misconception about the sprint cycle. And it actually is because of a misunderstanding of the thing called the sprint review. Can anybody tell me what the sprint review is for?
Inspect the products.
Inspect the product. Okay. In the world of the Scrum Alliance, it's called the demo. Okay. And in the world of the Scrum Alliance, the purpose of it is for the developers to show the product owner what they have accomplished and to let the product owner say, okay, good, it's ready. So in effect, it's kind of a QA step. It's kind of, it's a final check on whether the stuff is really ready at the end of the sprint. That's what everybody understands, right? That is wrong. That is not what the sprint review is about. You have a definition of done, right? Which is, in effect, it turns out to be a kind of a checklist. And is a feature, is something done? You check off the different boxes. And if it's done, then it is ready. Does it have to be done at the end of the sprint? No, it doesn't. That's why we have continuous integration, continuous deployment. Because if it's done, there's no reason not to put it in production. You don't have to wait for this final demo thing so that everybody say, yeah, it's done. The sprint review is not about making sure the stuff works. The sprint review is to stop and look at what the product is now. About what the product is actually doing, so that you can then say, hey, you know, it's doing this, and I want it to do something, but I want it to do something else. So we add to the product backlog as a result.
You could say it's about looking forward rather than looking back.
Right, yeah. Mr. Forgy.
Yeah.
Forgy.
That's all right, I'm gonna get to it. Yeah, how that turned into that, because you're always interested in, we had this great design and then where did we go wrong?
Yeah.
Is because you could never find it. To force them to at least show up and look at some things and say yes, no, or what there is. That's how it ended up being that, which is kind of sad. But I witnessed it about 100% of the time that you can't find anybody to look at something and go through and say yes, that's ready.
Well, that's probably because they don't feel accountable for the result.
Totally. So yeah, it's funny. You watch how that turns into that in like 3 or 4 sprints.
Yeah. Anyway, I hear people say, well, you can't do continuous deployment with Scrum because you have to wait to the end of the sprint.
Ludicrous. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So this probably builds on that question, but when it comes to business-driven development and when it comes to being able to account for refinement and the continuously evolving situation in the business, we have the review so that we can also be able to show stakeholders where everything is and what we have as a product. Is there a level of involvement? I mean, the product manager, I suppose, is also informing the stakeholders about where we are as we're going along. Not product manager, I said product owner. But is there any kind of level of continuous updating, be able to account for refinements and everything else that's also going on between stakeholders and the development team?
Okay, are you asking me or Bhavesh?
Anyone at this conference?
You wanna take a stab at it?
Definitely.
Okay.
And you back me up.
All right. I'll back you up.
Right.
Okay, can you please repeat the question?
Absolutely. The stakeholders, normally, we update them at the sprint review point,
Mm-hmm.
where we're saying, here's where the entire product is.
Sure.
The stakeholders also are updating the values of different features and everything that is coming out as it's going on, and that's why we have refinement.
Okay.
Where do we have a point where there's CS, continuous stakeholder involvement, other than a hippo stepping in and causing a fire drill?
Okay, yes, so two level of that review or buy-in, if you will. Product owner is heavily involved as she or he should be. That's on a daily basis. That's where you have this continuous integration, continuous deployment, especially if you are deploying in actual production environment, continuously, right? The other stakeholders, that's product owner's responsibility to manage. At the very least, a good product owner would make sure that part of the sprint review is that stakeholder management. That's my view. That's what I advocate in any team that I'm functioning. Remember, at the end of the day, it is product owner who has to decide what goes into the product, moving forward or currently. The third thing I want to mention, I kind of want to go back to Jim's. See, I said decouple releases from sprints. That also means you don't necessarily have to expose everything immediately into your production environment to the end user. That's prerogative of the product owner. Some teams and some warrant that you hold on to your incremental feature sets for a period of time and then come out with that quote unquote release. And that's okay.
Yeah, that's kind of how the banks require to use it, that's kind of how the banks do it.
Yeah.
Same with PayPal, we have very good business reasons for not, and if we did that every day, we'd drive everybody
Oh,
insane.
yeah, yeah.
But other things like Google and Facebook, you can totally see why, you pull things on, put things off, nobody
Oh, in
knows.
fact, I'll allude to it a little bit in one of the later slides. But Google's and Facebook's of the world, they are in some way using their production environment to test that A/B testing. They'll expose new things to some users, but not others, and they have a way to do that.
Yeah.
And then they decide based on the reaction from those users who got exposed to the new features. Then they decide whether that's worthy enough to roll it out for the masses or not.
Yeah, LinkedIn does that all the time, also pushes to
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if anyone knows of a parallel to the old 3M story of cellophane tape. They invented the cellophane tape and then they invented the magic transparent tape. But they didn't push that one out to the market immediately. They held that one back, waited for all their competition to come out and generate cellophane tape, and they tooled up for all that. Then they killed them by releasing the transparent tape after the guys had already invested so much in tooling up for the old technology. So
Okay.
I'm wondering if there's any parallels anyone knows about in the software industry.
Happened in the hot pepper industry also.
Did.
Yeah, the person that made the scorpion chili pepper was holding back on even hotter peppers that they were able to release. Waiting for someone to come out with something in Wales, and they came out with it, and then he crushed them. So.
So strategic business reasons may cause the product owner to.
Oh,
hold back,
definitely.
but I'm wondering if anybody knew of the software example.
Not that I'm aware of.
Oh, well.
Oh, alright, so good discussion, thanks for your comments and ideas. I'm gonna move on. Okay, some recommendations. Part of your definition of done should be that code review is completed on the newly created code. Integration on mainline, remember I mentioned that, I keep talking about that every opportunity I get. You got to have your new code on mainline as soon as possible. Integration on the mainline code branch is finished. Unit test, integration test, and regression tests are completed. Deployment of new build in production or production-like environment has been successful. All this would form part of your definition of the done. The other portion of your definition of done conceivably would be whether the feature acts and behaves like product owner envisioned the feature to be, and so forth. So that portion of the definition of the done would be specific to each new capabilities. Make sense? This way, and the other part here, the corollary, control exposure of new features via software configuration. There is common debate that would take place in an engineering team. The developer may say, oh, but this feature is not complete in its entirety. I cannot expose it to the end user. Therefore, I'll leave it on the feature branch. Usually, we discuss that in a CI/CD environment, you can control what gets visible to the customer through the configuration of the software. And again, industry has created several mechanisms to do that. So it's possible.
You're talking about kill switches, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, basically you have something at the beginning of your new code that says if this switch isn't set, then just return.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And other times, I have seen, like in some of my teams, they would gray out the new buttons. You cannot do, and it acts. It serves a couple of purposes. One, of course, it does not expose the user to a feature functionality that is not yet ready. That's the primary goal. But the other goal is to generate some interest and get that sort of marketing buzz going. So finally, when we do come out with that